The Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to receive testimony on the efforts necessary to ensure a strong federal emergency management agency. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Before I do so, I'd like to welcome a new member, Republican member, joining our committee. Congressman John Rutherford represents Florida's 4th Congressional District. He began his career in law enforcement in 1974. John, that was the year I graduated high school. Most recently serving as Sheriff of Duval County, a position he has held for 12 years. This hearing is the first in a series of subcommittee that the subcommittee will hold to consider the future of FEMA. We will use what we learn at these hearings, along with the findings from past subcommittee work, to make recommendations for the next FEMA administrator, a roadmap of success of sorts. I think Captain Klininski may have said it best in his submitted testimony that we must, quote, recognize past progress at FEMA, but embrace innovative approaches for future policy development. And that's why we're here today. We want to hear from you, the practitioners, about what we need to do to stay on the path of a strong FEMA. What are those innovative approaches? What is going well at FEMA and should be continued? What can be improved? At the heart of the issue is leadership. As I discussed with Secretary Kelly last week, it is vital that the administration move quickly to appoint a qualified FEMA administrator. We have already had 7 major disasters declared this year. There is no doubt that FEMA has disaster-tested officials in place to get the job done, but it is important to install permanent leadership as soon as possible. The job requires an experienced emergency manager capable of navigating the national preparedness system. For more than a decade, billions have been invested across the United States to enhance capabilities and achieve the national preparedness goal. It is to FEMA's credit that such investments are making the United States stronger and safer in the face of emergencies. We have an obligation to keep this momentum going. Hurricane Katrina's devastation in 2005 demonstrated the significance of FEMA's mission and the failures that can occur when FEMA is unable to execute it. The Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act of 2006, coupled with effective leadership at FEMA, strengthened FEMA's capability to lead the national emergency management efforts. These capabilities are tested each time the National Response Coordination Center at FEMA headquarters is activated. My district in New York City saw firsthand in 2012 the need for strong federal, state, and local coordination when Superstorm Sandy caused widespread destruction. It should be noted that FEMA did make stark improvements from 2005 to 2012, but challenges still remain. This subcommittee looks forward to continuing its engagement with FEMA to support continued progress. According to the Committee on Homeland Security's Terror Threat Snapshot, the terrorist threat environment worsened in 2016. The number of homegrown jihadist cases and lone wolf attacks continues to surge, with attacks ranging from Ohio State University to Orlando and San Bernardino. FEMA has awarded over $40 billion in preparedness grants to states and localities since 2001 to build, sustain, and enhance their capabilities to protect the public from acts of terrorism and other hazards. It is important that we ensure resources and training remain accessible to communities across the country. The critical importance of these programs and how to continue to improve them is not lost on this subcommittee. We truly are a resilient nation. This is a testament to our first responders, emergency managers, and community partners at every level of government and their ability to continually adapt to ever-changing threats and vulnerabilities. Together, we can ensure our nation's continued ability to prevent, prepare for, mitigate, respond to, and recover from the threats and hazards that we face. Before I yield to the ranking member, I would like to ask unanimous consent to include statements in the record from stakeholder organizations, including the National Emergency Management Association and the National Association of Emergency Medical Technicians. Without objection, so ordered. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for an opening statement that he may have.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to thank Chairman Donovan for holding today's hearing. I look forward to working with the Chairman to take the feedback we receive at today's hearing as well as the follow-up hearing later this month and use it to help FEMA better serve its state and local partners and disaster survivors. For the first time in 8 years, FEMA is in transition, and we are awaiting the nomination of a new administrator. I have no doubt that FEMA is in capable hands with the interim administrator, but I'm concerned that the Trump administration has issued executive orders that affect the agency's activities before permanent leadership has been put in place. For example, Executive Order 13768 on public safety in the interior of the United States directs DHS to make ineligible for FEMA grants sanctuary jurisdictions except for law enforcement purposes. The executive order was clearly drafted without the advice of anyone who has to implement it. Certainly, a permanent FEMA administrator would have sought to clarify whether the president meant to block funding to jurisdictions in need of resources from the Emergency Management Performance Grant Program, the Assistance of Firefighters Grant Program, the Post-Disaster Public Assistance Grant Program, or the Post-Disaster Individual Assistance Grant Program, among others. In an era of evolving threats, increased weather events, and stretched budgets, we cannot send our state and local governments and our first responder communities into a tailspin as they try to figure out whether or not the federal government will continue to help them build and maintain preparedness capabilities. I would be interested in understanding whether the Trump administration conducted any outreach to the first responder community before or after issuing Executive Order 13768, and how the uncertainty caused by President Trump's executive order is affecting planning activities. To keep America safe, prepared, and resilient, the emergency response community must have a voice in informing the administration's policies and priorities. I urge the Trump administration to be inclusive in this regard and to continue Administrator Fugate's whole community emphasis on disaster preparedness. I invited Save the Children to testify today because too often the special needs of children are overlooked in disaster planning activities. Administrator Fugate designated an individual at FEMA to be the national advisor on children and disasters to tackle that challenge, but that position has not formally been authorized. I'm hopeful that the future FEMA administrator will maintain this position. This period of transition is an appropriate time to take inventory of the progress FEMA has made over the past 8 years and to become a more capable organization and to gather recommendations for the best path forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent that Sheila Jackson Lee be permitted to participate in today's hearing.
Yes, unanimous, without objection. Welcome. We are pleased to have a very distinguished panel before us today on this important topic. Captain Chris Kelnetsky serves as the Deputy State Director of Emergency Management and Homeland Security and Deputy Homeland Security Advisor for the state of Michigan. As such, he is responsible for the statewide management and administration of emergency management and Homeland Security programs, as well as the supervision of the division's employees. The captain chairs the Michigan Homeland Security Advisory Council, the Homeland Security Preparedness Committee, and the Michigan Citizen Community Emergency Response Coordinating Council. He is testifying today on behalf of the National Governors Association and the Governor's Homeland Security Advisors Council. Welcome, Captain. Thank you for your service. Chief John Sinclair serves as the fire chief of Kittitas Valley, and I know I said that wrong, Chief, and they phonetically spelt it for me, Valley Fire Rescue and Emergency Manager for the city of Ellensburg, Washington. Chief Sinclair represents the fire service on the National EMS Advisory Council. Chief Sinclair is the president and chairman of the board of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and he is testifying in that capacity today. Thank you for your service, and thank you for coming today, Chief. Mr. Richard Bland, who is a New Yorker, welcome, serves as the National Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Development at Save the Children. Prior to joining Save the Children, Mr. Bland served in positions at the YMCA and with Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Welcome. The witnesses' full recorded statements will appear in the record. The chair now recognizes Captain Kalninsky for a 5-minute opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Donovan, Member Payne, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is my honor to appear before you today. My name is Captain Chris Kalensky, and I serve as the Deputy State Director of Emergency Management and Homeland Security and Deputy Homeland Security Advisor to Michigan Governor Rick Snyder. I appear before you today on behalf of the nation's governors and their Homeland Security advisors. My testimony today will offer recommendations for how the next administrator of FEMA can succeed in his or her role. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the state-federal partnership in disaster preparedness and response, the need for dedicated federal investments in Homeland Security and emergency management, and issues on the horizon facing the next administrator. I would like to summarize my remarks and ask that my full written testimony be submitted for the record. Emergency management is a shared responsibility between states, localities, and the federal government. Governors are charged with the safety and security of the residents within their borders, and the FEMA administrator plays a critical role in shaping the direction of national emergency management efforts. The new FEMA administrator should establish a strong relationship with governors to honor this shared responsibility and recognize the role of the state. This relationship may be further developed through organizations such as the National Governors Association, NGA, and the Governor's Homeland Security Advisors Council. Another way the new FEMA administrator may demonstrate commitment to the state-federal partnership is ensuring that federal grant programs for states remain fully funded. The Homeland Security Grant Program, HSGP, and the Emergency Management Performance Grant, EMPG, assist states and localities in developing capabilities that have a shared federal benefit. These capabilities have supported disaster response efforts and thwarted potential terrorist attacks. Any reduction in federal funding for these programs could jeopardize the effectiveness of our nation's disaster preparedness and response. Grant reform is necessary to sustaining progress and building capacity to address new threats. Governors continue to support comprehensive grant reform and have developed principles to help guide the new administrator and Congress in developing those efforts. Governors believe that any reform should create a program that is sustainable, flexible, and risk-based. As FEMA seeks to reduce costs for disasters, the next administrator will determine how to proceed with the disaster deductible concept. Governors share the federal government's role of reducing costs of disasters. However, it is imperative that the new deductible concept does not result in a cost shift to the states. Governors are already investing in activities to reduce the overall risk and costs of disasters. FEMA should look to the states for innovative solutions. Another challenge awaiting the next FEMA administrator is the emerging threat of cybersecurity. The next administrator should work with the Secretary of Homeland Security to clarify FEMA's role in cyber incident response. Significant time and effort have been made by state, local, and federal officials to establish solid frameworks that can serve as a guide in the event of a cyber incident. The next FEMA administrator should utilize these existing frameworks to ensure national emergency management policies remain consistent. Separately, governors have dedicated significant time and resources to combat this growing threat. For example, in 2011, Michigan Governor Rick Snyder introduced the Michigan Cyber Initiative to encourage a statewide effort among public and private partners to defend Michigan's critical networks. Under that initiative, Michigan created the Cyber Response Strategy in 2013 and later implemented the Michigan Cyber Disruption Plan in 2015. Nationwide, governors are working to address this critical issue. Under the leadership of Michigan Governor Rick Snyder and former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, NGA created the Resource Center for State Cybersecurity, which has helped bring this issue to the forefront across the nation. Governor Snyder's continued focus on cybersecurity from a state, national, and international perspective, along with the NGA Chair and Resource Center Co-Chair, Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe's initiative, Meet the Threat, States Confront the Cybersecurity Challenge, states have received increased guidance on how to tackle cybersecurity challenges in numerous areas, to include emergency management. As our nation continues to face severe weather events and other emerging threats, FEMA will need sound leadership at both the national and regional level to oversee national emergency management activities. Governors are vested in the success of the FEMA administrator and look forward to working with whomever assumes that role. On behalf of the National Governors Association and the Governor's Homeland Security Advisors Council, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I welcome any questions the subcommittee members may have.
Thank you for your testimony, Captain. The chair now recognizes Chief Sinclair for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the subcommittee. I am John Sinclair, Fire Chief of Kittitas Valley Fire and Rescue Department in Ellensburg, Washington. I'm also the President and Chairman of the Board of the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the future of FEMA. The nation's fire and EMS departments are FEMA's partners during national emergencies. We provide the resources to help communities respond and recover. We also rely upon FEMA's training and grant programs to respond to all hazards. The ISC believes that the President should appoint an experienced fire service leader or emergency manager as administrator. As experienced leaders, both Dave Paulison and Craig Fugate transformed FEMA into a more proactive organization. We urge the President to appoint an experienced FEMA leadership team soon. Included on this team would be a U.S. Fire Administrator who can follow in Chief Ernie Mitchell's exemplary recent service. Across the nation, local fire and EMS departments respond to a multitude of threats. As a local fire chief, I must prepare for fires, medical emergencies, earthquakes, wildland fires, landslides, flooding, and the potential for a mass casualty event. With limited budgets, fire and EMS departments must prioritize training, equipment purchases, staffing, and exercises to meet these missions. The Fire and Emergency Service needs FEMA's help in identifying risks, prioritizing threats, and preparing to meet them. FEMA must work with DHS, the FBI, and the intelligence community to get vital threat information to local fire chiefs. This information should be actionable, written with the local fire chief in mind as an audience, and unclassified. Programs like NCTC's Joint Counterterrorism Assessment Team and the DHS Office of Intelligence and Analysis provide essential information to local first responders. Also, FEMA's grants fund intelligence fusion centers, which must provide critical information to local fire departments. In addition, the U.S. Fire Administration can provide specific training to help fire and EMS departments integrate intelligence into their preparedness programs. FEMA should continue to maintain the national preparedness goal and the national preparedness system. The IFC is pleased to see that fire management and suppression was added as a core capability in a recent national preparedness goal revision. In support of the NPG, FEMA must ensure a strong national mutual aid system in the face of tight national budgets. A robust mutual aid system is a cost-effective way to protect our citizens' lives and property. However, local fire departments bear the cost of these interstate deployments until they are reimbursed. FEMA must ensure that fire departments are reimbursed in a timely manner. FEMA can take other steps to maintain the national preparedness system. It should work with FirstNet and the DHS Office of Emergency Communications to improve our public safety communications capability. In addition, FEMA should support efforts to build statewide mutual aid systems that can effectively complement the EMAC during national emergencies. FEMA's grant programs are critical foundations of the national preparedness systems. Federal grants like the UASI and SHUSHGAP program bring federal, state, and local emergency response organizations together to train and plan for potential acts of terrorism. FEMA grants also support a regional response framework that can mobilize resources quickly and effectively during a terrorist attack. We request that Congress reject cuts to these programs for FY 2017. The IFC is concerned about the effects of the President's recent executive order regarding sanctuary jurisdictions. The IFC board has not adopted a position on this issue of sanctuary cities. However, we are concerned that major metropolitan fire and EMS departments might lose eligibility for FEMA grants if they are in designated sanctuary jurisdictions. We recommend that the President and Congress extend the current law enforcement exception to include all public safety organizations. The Fire and Safer grants programs also support national preparedness systems. These matching grant programs directly help fire departments develop their baseline emergency response capabilities. For example, I have used AFG grants to replace old bunker gear and SCBAs. The Fire and Safer grant programs face a statutory sunset next year. We urge Congress to reauthorize these programs for an additional 5 years. We would also ask Congress to reauthorize the U.S. Fire Administration. This agency provides important leadership and training for local fire departments. We request $44 million for USFA in FY17. Finally, I would like to emphasize the IFC support for an enhanced mitigation mission for FEMA. We ask Congress to pass legislation that will bolster our nation's pre-disaster and post-disaster mitigation efforts. We want to work with this committee, the administration, to help make America safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief. The chair now recognizes Mr. Bland for 5 minutes.
Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and esteemed members of the Homeland Security Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the future of FEMA. My name is Rich Bland, and I'm the National Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Development at Save the Children. At Save the Children, we believe that every child deserves a healthy start, the opportunity to learn, and protection from harm. It is in this last vein, protection from harm, that I want to talk to you today. My hope is to cover 3 broad issues. First, the problem, how Katrina and subsequent disasters have been a wake-up call on children's needs. Second, the solutions, the role of the National Commission on Children Disasters, and Save the Children's 10 years later follow-up report, which you all have with you today. And third, one action we can take today, one concrete action, the importance of creating a permanent children's needs advisor at FEMA. Imagine where you were 12 years ago, in the late summer of 2005, when you first heard about Hurricane Katrina. Remember how shocked you were when the levees broke, when the death toll began to mount, and when you saw the seemingly endless images of people on rooftops, wading in water, struggling to survive? It was a watershed moment, not just for our country, but also for Save the Children. You see, Save the Children has been responding to emergencies around the world for nearly a century, but never domestically. In war-torn and developing countries, yes. In the United States, no. The thinking was the richest nation in the world had it covered, so no need to worry. But the reports started coming in. The TV images, the cries for help, and no shortage of children in need. So just in case, we began to call responders along the Gulf Coast, government, agencies, nonprofits. We asked the heads of shelters, how many children do you have? And at which shelters? The response was, we have no idea. No idea. Many more of our questions went unanswered in the days that followed. And as a result, Save the Children decided to deploy to the Gulf Coast in its first major disaster response effort here within the United States. Since Katrina, we have deployed to every major disaster, serving more than 1 million children, including 6 disasters in 2016 alone. And as of yesterday, we deployed to California in the Oroville area regarding the evacuation there. Katrina was a shocking moment for all of us. Yet today, children are still facing many of the same risks from an emergency as they did 12 years ago. Thus, my second issue, solutions. After Katrina, Congress and the President created the National Commission on Children Disasters. Save the Children was honored to lead it, along with an incredible group of expert commissioners. The Commission created a detailed roadmap of needs and solutions with 11 chapters on 11 functional areas related to the gaps, and then came up with 81 recommendations. I am here to tell you today that nearly 80% of those recommendations remain unfulfilled. Do we really want to wait for the next Katrina-type event to get back to this work? Now, to be fair, much progress has been made, and much of it at FEMA. But those steps are far from complete, and there's nothing to guarantee any focus on children's needs in the future. We need accountability. Our children deserve it. The report you have in your hands is the first effort to hold government accountable for the recommendations of the National Commission. All levels of government have a role to play. You'll see 11 chapters, and it says where the recommendations were not met, that's red, where they were met, that's green, and then where they're underway, that's yellow. Yet, the results are startling. Nearly 80% of the recommendations have not been met. In addition, we now know that less than 0.1% of all federal preparedness grants go to children's needs. Thankfully, Congressman Payne, you have been a stalwart champion raising attention to these needs, so thank you for that. Most recently, your ability to pass H.R. 4509 will go a long way towards connecting emergency management to children's needs representatives at the state level, so thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Donovan, for co-sponsoring the PREPARE Act with Mr. Payne last Congress. This would indeed make the Children's Needs Coordinator permanent. So I look forward to working with you on that. As for what comes next, to this day when we deploy Save the Children as a witness to the fact that children are still more an afterthought than a priority, I'd like to leave you with 2 facts. Recall that children are 25 to 50% of the population depending on the community. This is no fringe group. And furthermore, as the pediatricians remind us, children are not merely small adults. Consider how unique their needs are. Protection needs at shelters, specialized supply needs and response efforts, tailored medical needs and treatment. The list goes on. So let's just take one of the recommendations that we think we can make permanent and concrete, the Permanent Children's Needs Advisor at FEMA. Of course, it's no one-size-fits-all solution, but we have come here today to suggest that we take that one big step. We believe each of these gap areas, be it mental health, shelter standards, or preparedness, starts with government accountability. And having someone at the highest level of FEMA with the power to remind the administrator and all the departments of FEMA about the unique needs of children is vital. While some administrators, including Mr. Fugate, have had a stellar track record at prioritizing children's needs, and in fact temporarily appointing a children's needs coordinator, that position is not required, and it could fade to obscurity. That cannot and should not happen. So we are here today to ask you to join with us in addressing these gaps and taking the first step, which is to make the Children's Needs Advisor at FEMA permanent. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bland. I thank you all for your testimony. I'll recognize myself now for 5 minutes of questioning. As I told all of you before we began, this committee, one of the things I'm proud of, my good friend Don Payne and I don't waste people's time. We don't hold committee hearings every week just to have committee hearings. We hold them for a purpose, and then we take the information that's derived from the hearing and put it to work. So your testimony today, your suggestions, your answers to our questions will go into some form of evaluation we will give to the new administrator as recommendations of what she or he should do. With that in mind, and all of you have brought out various concerns that you all have, the new administrator is going to come in and have a lot of things before her or before him. In each of your specific areas, what do you think is the first thing the new FEMA administrator ought to address, something that cannot wait, something that time is of the essence for each of you?
Well, first and foremost, I believe the interaction and engagement with the state's governors and their key officials. That's key right off the bat. And then to look to the states to see what specific needs that they collectively have that need to be addressed. And working through organizations such as the NGA and the Governor's Homeland Security Advisor Council is also a good way to get that information. But I think it's necessary to reach out to the states and find out what those issues are. Some of the ones that are out there are what innovative solutions, whether they're innovative solutions to grants or technology or the intelligence and information sharing that's going on. Those are some key issues that need to be looked into, as well as the grant reform concept that we talked about earlier, sir.
Thank you, Captain. Chief?
Yes, Chairman Donovan, thank you very much for the question. It's incumbent that whoever comes into this position knows and understands that it's a partnership, that it is vital that they know that the first responders that are out there, the law enforcement community, police, fire, EMS, public health, the first receivers, the hospital systems, are all folks that are going to be on scene long before the federal government can begin to ramp up and begin to take action. And so everything that we can do to help that response community be ready for an all-hazards environment is vital. Some of that includes simple things like information sharing through the fusion centers. I'll give you one very specific example. In Nice, France, on Bastille Day, we had a significant event where somebody took a big truck and ran it through a bunch of people. We should have had somebody in the fusion centers taking a look at that and providing information out to every law enforcement and fire and EMS jurisdiction across this nation saying, here's a new tactic, here's some ideas on how to prepare for that. But the big issue is recognizing that there's a partnership and that it's a partnership all the way down to the local level.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Bland?
Thanks for the question. I think it is really the Children's Needs Advisor. The former administrator, Mr. Fugate, just did a remarkable job, and he really personally felt the priority of children's need as a vulnerable community. But as he himself would admit, that is not required. It is not required by statute, and so it can't be personality driven by the administrator. In addition, that role has this kind of internal auditing function where whatever they're going to roll out or whatever new proposal they come across, to have this technical expert to say, but how is it going to affect kids? Have you thought about that? They're not just small adults. In addition, we've got a lot of momentum. So your bill, the PREPARE Act, endorsed this idea, and the National Advisory Committee, which is required by PCMRA, actually this was their #1 recommendation on children's needs. So we've got some momentum. Mr. Fugate agreed with the National Advisory Committee in his official response and said, I agree, but I'm leaving. So I think for all of those reasons, and just on top of that, I guess I would say let's keep up the momentum. I don't mean to paint too stark a picture because we have come a long way since Katrina, but there were 11 chapters. And there were 11 big gaps, and this concrete step would be a good first step. So I hope that's helpful.
Wonderful. I thank all of you. I had 6 more questions, but we'll submit those in writing. My time is up. The chair now recognizes my friend from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate working with you once again. I think your statement is absolutely correct. We try not to waste people's times, and the information that we do receive at these hearings eventually turns into legislation. So I want to thank you for your leadership Let me just ask, first of all, thank you for all being here and your testimony. You know, with FEMA being in transition, you know, a new administrator, as I stated, has not been named, and the Trump administration's priorities in the emergency management space are unclear. Has the Trump administration engaged you or your organizations during this transition process?
I know that there have been discussions with other associations involved in this area, but I don't know specifically. We would have to follow up later with that answer, sir, from individual organizations.
Okay. Chief, I'm sorry.
We met with both campaigns prior to the election to give them our opinion about certain issues as it related to key positions within the federal government. Subsequent to that, I've not had a meeting with them.
Our organization, as you know, has kind of health priorities, education priorities, and protection priorities, and we met with both campaigns and it focused on early childhood education priorities. We haven't spoken to them about protection in emergencies yet.
Okay, thank you. And we will definitely make sure that we encourage the administration to reach out to make sure that you do have input in that area. Let's see. Chief Sinclair's not here.
Yes,
Chief Sinclair, okay. Chief Sinclair, President Trump's Sanctuary Cities executive order requires the Secretary of Homeland Security to ensure that sanctuary jurisdictions are ineligible for federal grants except for law enforcement purposes. The executive order makes no clear exception for public safety or fire management. Did the Trump administration contact the International Association of Fire Chiefs to learn how losing access to these federal dollars would affect their ability to carry out their mission?
Ranking Member Payne, no, we have not been contacted directly from the administration relative to that. We would, as I stated in my testimony, request that the law enforcement exception be extended to the entire public safety community. We do believe that because that the SHUSHGAP and the UASI grants go to fund fusion centers, it's going to be very difficult to isolate just the law enforcement component to that because it is, they're going to work with key pieces that affect all of public safety. So we believe that a public safety exception is certainly appropriate to do.
Sure, and especially in this new environment, you know, the public safety community has come together in such a great way that it would absolutely be difficult to separate them. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bland, in your testimony, you talked about the need for a permanent child's need technical expert at FEMA. Can you talk about how Save the Children works with the current children's needs technical expert?
Sure. The technical expert, as I mentioned, serves as this kind of internal auditing function. So when there is something, whether it be a response, like in California right now, that expert actually can go and respond and be the expert to people in the field. And so they come to us, and we work with American Red Cross in that deployment, but they come to us, and we coordinate all the resources. I mean, it's a nice fluid function that says, well, what does HHS, what does ACF, what does OSEFR have to offer? So that without that kind of hub reaching out to us, American Academy of Pediatrics, NECMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that would be a gap. That kind of hub, and then also then back when they're rolling out an idea or an initiative to come to us and other stakeholders and say, but remember, how does this affect kids? What's your input on that? So those are two critical functions that they engage with us on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize other members of the subcommittee for questions that they may wish to ask of our witnesses. In accordance with committee rules and practice, I plan to recognize members who were present at the start of the hearing by seniority on the subcommittee. Those coming in later will be recognized in the order of arrival. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panel, for being here today to help us address this very important national issue. One of the things that I'd like to ask very quickly, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'd like to find out. The National Preparedness report that identifies the 32 core capabilities, those are not designated by law, correct? It came out of policy. And so I'd like to ask you, Director Bland, if we were to put child needs into a 33rd preparedness goal, wouldn't that be possible through the policy that already exists?
As I understand it, that would be a great idea. We'd look to work with you on that. One idea that came up is to have the Children's Needs Coordinator report back to the National Advisory Committee. So instead of reporting to external groups, but also not necessarily reporting in statute to the administrator, to have this kind of accountability on and say on a 33rd standard, I think is a great idea. But what's happened is you don't really have a built-in accountability structure to say to each administrator or each department, how are we doing on this gap? Yeah. So if that person could report to the NAC, which the PCMRA, sorry about the acronyms, I think that would be a great idea, and in addition on the preparedness framework to work on that too. So thank you.
Also, I'd like to ask, Chief, has IACP had any conversations with the leadership in sanctuary cities to make clear to them the dangers that they put their constituents in by potential loss of federal funding?
Representative Rutherford, the IACP or the IFC?
I'm sorry, IFC.
No, sir, we have not.
Okay. You know, I think those would be conversations worth having as well. Sanctuary cities, that's a choice that those cities are making, and there are consequences that flow from all decisions. So I think it would be wise to highlight for them exactly what that impact would be. If I could ask the panel as a whole, one of the things we can continue to hear about, and Chief, you actually touched on this, is the inability to really get good, actionable intelligence out of the fusion centers. We have that same issue on the law enforcement side sometimes. And that actually scores low. Cybersecurity and recovery capabilities of those systems scores low almost every year nationally. Do you have any specific ideas on how we can better make that happen?
Thank you for the question. I think that there's a couple of different things. Having had the opportunity to work with the DHS Office of Health Affairs as it related to fusion centers with the EMS issue and fire department involvement, I think one of the things is that the local community needs to make sure that they've got that expertise in the fusion center, and that's going to then help make sure that when the raw data comes in, that they can take a look at it and make sure that that application is there. So making sure that there are people in the fusion center that come out of the disciplines of the fire service, emergency medical services, public health, and the impacts, I think, is going to be very helpful. Some of the fusion centers have that capability, some don't, but sort of putting that into the culture of it is something that's going to be very helpful.
I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony here today. In 2006, Congress created the position of Disability Coordinator at FEMA to provide guidance to both FEMA staff and state and local partners on how to incorporate people with disabilities into disaster planning. So, Captain Kolensky and Chief Sinclair, how do you account for people with disabilities in your disaster planning? Do you find guidance from FEMA in this regard to be helpful at all?
Thank you for the question, sir. And absolutely, one of the great things about FEMA is that they know how to work across multi-disciplines. So when we have an emergency or disaster, regardless of what the cause is, FEMA is there to provide that technical assistance as well as the overall management for these events. And specifically in the disasters that I've handled, they have provided an enormous amount of information and assistance with access and functional needs and any disabilities, steps we have to take, whether it's ensuring that things are printed or done with American Sign Language and just every aspect that typically we may not see at a state level as much. But during these events, it's critical to have them there and to bring them on early with liaison officers before even a declaration by the president has been received.
Thank you. Chief?
Thank you very much for the question. The state of Washington, over the last 5 years, has had a lot of wildland events. We've also had flooding events. We work very closely with FEMA Region 10 on these particular issues to make sure that those communities that are going to be affected are well-informed. And what we try to do is make sure that we've got information out there. They work with us. They do a lot of work in getting information out through the major media markets and information all the way down to the local emergency manager at the city and county level. And we also update our plan once every 5 years, and they give overview between FEMA Region 10 and our state emergency management organization on how to make sure that we're dealing with the needs of that particular community. So it's been very helpful.
Thank you.
Congressman, if I could just add that Save the Children ran since 2008. We've run a report card that assesses the states on how they're doing on preparedness. And one of the factors, there are 4 criteria. And one is, how are you doing on preparing for children with special needs, with access and functional needs? And in 2008, only 4 states met our standards. And thanks to work with Congressman Payne and others, by the end of 2017, all 50 states will meet all 4 of our standards. But it was a long way coming. And one other small point is there's a fantastic disability needs coordinator at FEMA. And Mr. Fugate, when we first started talking to him about this, Marcy Roth, he said, you all should pattern yourself after the disability community, because that's what he did. He learned from them in more inclusive planning. He'll tell you, if you have an annex for the disabled, if you have an annex for the children, if you have an annex for pets, you're doing it wrong. You need to be more inclusive. So we're trying to learn, and Marcy Roth has been a great asset. Unfortunately, because of personnel reasons and a snafu with OPM, she is not there right now.
Well, thank you for adding that those comments in, and I want to make sure that people with disabilities are a forethought, not an afterthought. There's special planning that needs to take place, and better time to do it ahead of time than the middle of the disaster. So thank you for the work you're doing on that. Captain Kolensky, for the last better part of a decade, I spent a great deal of time focusing on cybersecurity. It's been one of my chief concerns here in Congress. And in my capacity as co-chair of the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus, I've been impressed by your state's commitment to innovation in combating cyber threat. And in your capacity testifying on behalf of the National Governors Association, I also want to commend Chairman McAuliffe for his dedication on this issue as well. So in your experience, what is the maturity level with respect to incorporating cybersecurity incident response into all hazards planning?
I think it's different in every state. Some states are further ahead than others. The nice thing is, with organizations such as NGA, we're able to share that information. In my testimony, I spoke to some of the things that have been put in place, and we're helping other states along. For our state, we are co-located. We have our Cyber Command Center, our Computer Crime Section, our Fusion Center, State Emergency Operations Center, as well as the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Division, all co-located. That's just the way one system operates. Every state is a little bit different, but the cyber disruption plans and the different items that have been put through the Resource Center, that's what's going to help us get to that point we all need to be individually as states, because every state is going to probably look a little bit different, but those frameworks are in place, and it's critical that we just build on those existing frameworks, sir.
Very good. Well, thank you, Captain. Yeah, this is an issue that's not going to go away anytime soon, and especially the fact that now what in the past would have been achieved through use of kinetic weapons, for example, could be done with a few keystrokes, and we need to do what we can to be prepared for those incidents, and then also have a resiliency plan. So, thank you for what you're doing in that space. I know my time expired. I have a few more questions on cyber. I'll submit those for the record, and hope we can get back to us on those. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Before I recognize him, I'd like to welcome Congressman Tom Garrett to the committee. He represents Virginia's 5th Congressional District. Prior to joining Congress, he served in the Army as the Commonwealth's Attorney and State Senator of Virginia's 22nd District. Welcome, Congressman, and I recognize you for the 5 minutes for questioning.
Sinclair, you're obviously a member of IAFC, also I presume IAFF. I want to piggyback for a moment on Mr. Rutherford's questions. Essentially, what you testified to here this morning is that you've not gone to the cities with sanctuary policies and warned them of the potential of a loss of federal funding.
That is correct, sir. We have not.
But you have come here and asked us not to act to enforce federal law.
Sir, what we're asking for is that there is a exclusion for law enforcement. What we're asking is that that exclusion be broadened to the entire public safety community because of the fact that the fusion centers that are being funded are going to be giving information to not just law enforcement, but we work very collaboratively at the local level.
Right. So, among other things not included on the brief resume that the chairman shared was my membership on the Commonwealth Preparedness Board and work with the Virginia Fusion Center and my work as a federal prosecutor as well as a state prosecutor. So these are some things that I'm familiar with. It just strikes me, and I make this by way of a suggestion, that perhaps if you're going to suggest to us that we broaden the exemption as it relates to groups that would continue to receive federal funding should localities intentionally choose not to enforce federal law, that you might also go back to those localities and warn them of the potential impact on them, the loss of resources, et cetera. I would target this next question, and probably my choice of words is poor, to Captain Kleneski.
Kalensky, sir.
Kalensky, you work with me.
I will, sir.
And so I know you're not an attorney, or I presume you're not, but you work a career presumably with the state police.
Yes, sir.
So you're familiar with the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so help me here, because I've been trying to wrap my brain around this for a long time. If an individual is picked up on a federal detainer, let's say for identity theft, and they're a U.S. citizen, and a locality, let's say San Francisco, holds them for federal pickup so that that detainer can be executed and they can be tried for identity theft. That's the execution of justice, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, if that same individual happens to be here illegally and therefore that locality, San Francisco, refuses to hold them, have we not violated the Equal Protection Clause under the 14th Amendment by virtue of creating a different standard by which we apply justice to those who are here legally versus illegally?
Well, what I would say, sir, is that states recognize that immigration is a federal responsibility, and the governor's asked that the federal government continue to work with states and localities as partners to address all the different components of this very important issue.
Right, but the Equal Protection Clause provides that no state shall deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. So if a locality chooses to hold someone, a U.S. citizen, charged with a particular offense, but release someone who's not a citizen charged with the exact same offense, does that not violate the equal protection right of American-born criminal defendants?
I don't know if I'm prepared to answer that question here, sir. I'm more than willing to discuss and follow up after the fact. Not being engaged with that on a day-to-day basis, I would be very hesitant to.
Well, you know what, and I'll give you something of an apology because you kind of are the guy closest to the guy I'm looking for who's not sitting on the dais there. But thank you for what you do, all of you. The final question, I think I have time, is to Mr. Bland, and you outlined your 4 standards, or you mentioned your 4 standards. I was wondering if you could articulate what the 4 standards are that you're hoping that states and localities will meet.
Sure. So if you'll recall, the National Commission had those 11 chapters. They were kind of functional areas, and then our follow-up report tackled those 11 chapters. We had to walk before we could run, so we took one chapter, which was child care and school preparedness. And we said, okay, what are the 4 standards that at a baseline states should uphold in their regulations for schools and child care? And it was evacuation and relocation, a reunification plan, a relocation site. Those are all for child care, and then and the special needs, as I mentioned before, in child care. And then the 4th is for schools, a multi-hazard plan to make sure they're not just doing fire, they're doing lockdown drills and also preparing for a natural emergency like a tornado, so a multi-hazard plan for schools.
Thank you, and I found it in your publication up here.
Yes,
Thanks to my
thank
colleague, Mr. Rutherford. Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I would comment that the thing that bothered me most from my time on the Commonwealth Preparedness Board in Virginia was that we had pretty good plans that none of the citizenry knew about. And it's hard to implement and execute a plan when there's no information disseminated to the end user, the citizens. And I yield back my negative 13 seconds.
Gentleman's time has expired. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony. My goal was to get you out of here in an hour, and we achieved that. And I'd like to thank my fellow members of the committee for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions, as many of us do, for the witnesses, and we'll ask that you respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. That's efficient, right, Don?